focusing on the future of carbon markets here in South Africa and extending that conversation to the future of markets in Africa. Brett Jordaan, Vice President of Evolution Markets, and Lodewijk Nell, Director of Consultancy at EcoMetrix Africa, is in studio with me this morning. Very good morning to you, gentlemen. Brett, I think let's kick off with you. The big issue really is what happens post-2012 to the carbon market and the clean development mechanism here in South Africa. Just explain what the whole issue is around the end of the first period of the Precarious Protocol.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, Samantha, the commitment towards cutting emissions and the commitment of the various member nations of the Kyoto Protocol, that ends in 2012. Now everyone is trying to patch together a new successor to that scheme, a global successor. But the problem is, in the absence of any agreement, which it will hopefully, the people are hoping will be reached at the end of the year in Durban, we are facing a lot of uncertainty, and particularly with respect to the CDM market. Now, CDM is the market whereby projects can generate credits which are used for compliance in Europe. So
a clean project, a clean development mechanism project, say for example in a developing country,
like
can sell their carbon credits over into the EU, make money through that,
yes,
and then also encourage a sustainable development in developing countries.
Exactly, like South Africa. So for example, a wind project here would be able to sell credits for displacing coal-based emissions, and that effectively acts as a subsidy for that wind project. But at the moment, because there is no successor to the current protocol, beyond 2012, there is all this uncertainty as to whether or not developing countries' credits will be eligible. And the European Union has stated that they will only accept credits from least developed countries beyond 2012. So the concern from the market perspective is that absent any kind of certainty or agreement with the EU, developing countries in South Africa in particular stand to lose out on potentially billions of rands worth of clean tech subsidies.
When we're talking about the carbon market as it stands here in South Africa, I mean, how large is it?
Well, carbon markets are primarily large outside Africa, but what you've seen, let's say, the last years, is that it is picking up in Africa.
I mean, it's grown by what, 1,000% since 2005 globally? Or more than that, but locally, I mean, what is the value of it?
Well, what you look, let's say, I would talk, let's say, in number of projects. What you see, let's say, you have thousands of projects in Asia going on, and if you look at in Africa, we're talking about hundreds of projects being in the pipeline. So it took a while before Africa geared up and is making use of the clean development mechanism, but it is gearing up and is now getting to a proportion that it is significant. And what we're facing now is the threat that up on, let's say, kicking off here with true CDM in a larger scale, that the plug is pulled.
So just as the market is getting going, there's this concern about, as you say, the plug being pulled. What is the South African government doing in order to protect potential growth of the carbon market and revenues from that?
Yeah, that was exactly our concern. What is the government doing? Because the debate between public and private sector hasn't been going on well. So private markets have been asking themselves what's being done from an African perspective on this issue. And yesterday, when we had an event actually with a delegate from the European Union and a delegate from the negotiation party representing South Africa, it became apparent that these things are discussed, but they are discussed behind the scenes. And not knowing anything going about this subject and dealing with this issue of least developed countries, the uncertainty already has its impact on the markets.
But Brett, what are the options? Because it's all up to the EU, because they're the biggest buyer of carbon in the world. So is it really can the South African government really negotiate for them to change their stance on the fact that we won't be able to qualify for committing our CDM project post 2012?
There are a number of options. To be honest, I think it's more of a bargaining position than anything else, because focusing only on least developed countries will effectively kill the carbon markets from a project-based perspective. And actually, last night, the European delegate put it the other way. He said it's actually up to South Africa, because the EU wants to support Africa. They want to see a continuation of the carbon markets. But at the same time, they want South Africa and African countries to actually commit towards binding emissions targets in the future. Now,
so it's a political bargaining situation, that's really, but can we commit to that?
I think we can. The question is, and it actually sounds like we are working towards that. The South African, it was quite encouraging to hear about the level of work that's going on behind the scenes. One of the takeaways was that there obviously needs to be more dialogue between the government and the private sector, because the markets are, worried in the absence of any certainty. But it is pretty encouraging. The concern is whether or not they're going to do anything or put in place a mechanism in time such that there's a smooth transition towards South Africa perhaps signing up to emissions reductions by 2020. So at the moment they're talking about a 34% reduction below business as usual emissions by 2020. So that's a path to get towards, but that's conditional on the EU actually providing and developed countries providing financial support. So it's very much
that's where the Clean Development Fund comes into play.
Yeah, you've got the Green Climate Fund that's coming into play.
And getting all the jargon confused here, but the Green Climate Fund.
Exactly. The thing is that has taken a lot of breath away from the whole discussion on the market side of things. But what was clear from the discussion we had yesterday is that this Green Climate Fund would be a combination of public funding and market mechanisms coming together. But what is certain is that
that will be developed world money going into sustainable development projects in developing countries.
Indeed. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year, starting from 2020, and some early cash being forked out before that. But it's highly uncertain now in a financial crisis situation that this is going to happen soon and that we get an agreement soon. So whether or not the Green Climate Fund will be a success, there is acknowledgement in the market there will be a big gap between now and the different mechanism becoming effective later on, maybe being a Green Climate Fund.
Yeah.
And what's happening to let's say solve this problem and not let markets die before getting the next solution in place.
What is happening? I mean, you say government is doing a lot of work behind the scenes, and you say that it's all dependent on whether we commit to some form of emissions caps going forward. There has been this carbon tax which has been tabled. What is the likelihood of that taking place over and above, say, emissions caps?
Well, a good thing that we saw in the discussion is that there is recognition also from the European Union, the main off-taker of carbon credits, that South Africa has a different position than the other basic countries. And that South Africa is also seen as a leading country of the African continent in this regard. Should be treated differently, and there may be options to, let's say, for Africa and South Africa in particular, to come up with a solution to cover this gap, at least for the African continent.
When we talk about trading in carbon, we don't obviously you can't trade carbon on the JSE. Has there been any development towards developing, say, perhaps a voluntary carbon trading mechanism?
I've heard about the JSE potentially listing a platform for trading voluntary credits, and I believe that is going to be going through this year. To be honest, the voluntary market is minuscule in comparison to the compliance market, and there are a variety of standards and project types, and it's very much dependent on economic situation, macroeconomic conditions. So I don't think it's going to play a major role in any kind of scheme moving forward.
Yeah. What can the private sector do in the meantime? Because government has to do its work on the sidelines and of course at COP. What is the private sector doing to keep the carbon market going in the interim?
Well, that's first also being more vocal and addressing this issue with government. And that's one of the things we tried to do yesterday. Secondly, it's taking the benefit of the other mechanisms out there. But
apart
still,
from CDM.
Apart from CDM, because there's other type of soft loans and financing instruments there. Yeah, those are more. They're not that large. Let's say as a CDM. So it is an issue that this is lacking and will have an impact definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk about opportunities then for those least developed countries, because we've got 33 of those in Africa. Can South Africa play a role in helping, give advice and transfer of technology perhaps to those countries?
Oh, absolutely. As you see, South Africa is the leader from an economic and very much a political perspective in Africa. And I think that the LDCs can stand to gain a lot from the expertise that we have gained in CDM. South Africa has the most number of registered projects in the CDM on the continent. And the LDCs certainly need it because they don't have the infrastructure, the technology or the know-how. I think only one project from all of the LDCs within Africa has issued credits so far. So definitely.
Yeah, and just in terms of the projects that we have in South Africa, we've got Goldfields, which is one of the better known projects. What type of earnings potential are these generating?
Well, we're talking about market prices that generally were around 10 euros per ton of carbon reduced in emissions. So that can go up to revenue streams, let's say, of hundreds of thousands of euros on an annual basis, up to more.
And that takes it into the
very
millions
much
of
depending
rands.
to the capacity of and the size of the project we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think an adjacent project is looking at emissions reductions of around 90,000 carbon credits per year. So at 10 euros a ton, that's 900,000 euros or 9 million rand a year over a 10-year period, 90 million rand, which is pretty substantial.
Thanks very much for your insights today, and of course we will be following this closely as we lead up to COP17 at the end of November in Durban.